a talking cat, witches, a flying pig, a cohort of Russian intellectuals, Jesus Christ, Pontius Pilate, and a professor of black magic who was almost certainly Satan. No, these are not my ideal dinner party guests, although that would be fun. These are just some of the characters in one of my favourite novels, The Master and Margarita. And this will be the topic of my video today. Episode 30 in my Good Art, Bad Art series. So, cheers. It's nice to get to 30 episodes. My videos on Good Art, Bad Art are discussions mainly of music, actually, where I just share my views on whether a certain piece of music is an example of good art or bad art. But I like to indulge in literature every 10 episodes. So I hope you'll come on this journey with me and just hear my thoughts on The Master and Margarita. One of my favourite Russian novels, and actually just one of my favourite novels in general. Over these 8 minutes, I'll just, off the top of my head, share my thoughts with you. So who knows what I'm going to say? Yeah, who knows? Let me just share a quick quote from the novel to kick us off. Is that vodka? Margarita asked weakly. The cat jumped up in his seat with indignation. I beg pardon, my queen, he rasped. Would I ever allow myself to offer vodka to a lady? This is pure alcohol. So, I'm not saying I'm drinking vodka or pure alcohol, but you've got to celebrate 30 episodes. So, cheers. I hope you got the humour in that little quote there from Margarita having a chat with the talking cat Behemoth. I assume you know something about this book if you're tuning in. So I won't give a full breakdown of the plot and everything like that, but it is one of the funniest, most absurd, and most captivating and moving novels I've ever read. It's incredible. It's incredible. As Will Self has said, it is an example of the highest kind of literary art. Absolutely. And yet, it's literary without being self-consciously so, as can happen. It has these two settings, right? This is one of the absolute genius parts of the book. Partially, it's set in Moscow in the 1930s, partially in Jerusalem, set 2 millennia earlier in the time of Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ. And you get these back and forths of what's going on in Moscow with the arrival of Voland, Professor Voland, who is Satan really, and what he's doing to the inhabitants of Moscow, which is very, very amusing. And then what's happening with Pontius Pilate and Jesus Christ, or Yeshua HaNostri, as Bulgakov calls him, back in Jerusalem around the time of Jesus' execution by Pontius Pilate. So these are two very, very different things. One is comic and absurd, kind of dark humour, and the other is quasi-historical, religious, quite serious subject matter. Bulgakov, as you may know, was writing at the time of huge Soviet censorship. And he started writing this novel in 1928. In fact, he burnt his first manuscript. I think it was in 1930, 2 years later. He burned his first manuscript, just as the master does in the novel. But then he restarted it again. He wrote it again, because of course manuscripts don't burn. Another quote from the novel there. He had to start it again, and he eventually did finish it just weeks before his death in 1940. In fact, there were a few little loose ends, but he more or less finished it, thank God. But he had to write it in secret, and he almost certainly knew it would never be published in his lifetime. And maybe that gave him some of the freedom to be so creative. There's so many plot lines and storylines which are just so enjoyable. And it's nice to have so much humour in a deeply literary novel. There's wry humour or laughs on many, many pages. Maybe not those set in Jerusalem, but certainly those set in Moscow. And this book can be read on many levels, just as a great story, as a satire of what's going on at the time. There's certain questions of religion in there. Voland sort of tries to convince some of these Russian atheists that no, Jesus was real and Satan's real and atheism is wrong. But they can't be convinced. So yeah, Satan goes about doing various things to try to prove that to them, and just actually to show that the inhabitants of Moscow have got it all wrong, to great delight and amusement for the reader. I've read this book a few times in paperback, and I've listened to a wonderful audiobook narrated by Julian Rind-Tutt, who narrates it wonderfully. You might know him from playing Mac in Green Wing. Fantastic series. Anyway, he really brings it to life massively. It's funny how several characters, since I'm a musician, I can't help but notice that several characters are named after composers, right? There's a Stravinsky, a Dr. Stravinsky. There is Berlioz, of course, who gets beheaded quite early on. And there's even a Rimsky, as in Rimsky-Korsakov. Why? Well, there are reasons for these things. All the names have great significance in this novel. Berlioz, the composer, wrote an opera called The Damnation of Faust. And Goethe's Faust was a great inspiration for Bulgakov in the writing of this novel, and especially in the character of Voland. What type of book is it? Let me list you the Wikipedia genres that it claims this book is. Wikipedia says this book is fantasy, farce, romance, supernatural, satire, and modernist literature. All of the above. Yeah. And I suppose it is. Yeah, I suppose it is. It almost transcends genre, though, I would say. It's a unique piece of literature. And maybe, I wonder if Bulgakov had thought it could be published, maybe he would have written it differently. I don't know. But yes, he drew great inspiration from his own life. The master in the novel is a struggling writer who's faced rejection, much like Bulgakov. He drew inspiration from some literature he admired, of course, Dostoevsky, and he just drew inspiration from the political situation at the time. And yes, it's one of my favorite Russian novels. It's one of these weird Russian novels, up there with, say, Gogol or Andrei Bely, who wrote Petersburg. But it's full of this warm humor. Even when it's very dark, it's very warm. I give this a very high score of 95 out of 100. Cheers to episode 30. If you're still here, thank you for joining me on this journey where we discuss music and books. Let me know what I should cover next in either literature or music. And yeah, cheers. See you next time.